In this age of new normal, online is not your only option. Because new normal means new learning modalities and new learning possibilities. Let Vibal make learning offline possible with Smart Class. Smart Class contains pre-made daily modules sequenced according to DepEd's budgeted teaching and learning calendar. Each module has a specific lesson duration and has day markers to guide parents and teachers in the asynchronous learning of learners. Inside the modules available in Smart Class, you will find the following elements. First, learning competencies are identified in the module openers. Kickstarters are available to test students' prior knowledge on the subject matter. This set of activities, found at the beginning of each lesson, may also serve as motivational activities. Parents of preschool to grade 2 students will also find notes to parents which contain tips and pointers on how they can guide their child while learning at home. Redefine your students' learning experience with the integration of augmented reality technology into images and illustrations available in Smart Class, making learning more interactive and exciting. At the end of each module, Long Quiz is also available to assess students' understanding of the lesson. Smart Class also features Wrap Up, a lesson ender activity that applies the constructivism theory of learning. In Wrap Up, students are expected to summarize the lesson on their own using a graphic organizer. You may also evaluate the quality of your students' learning by letting them practice their learning in real life through GRASP's formatted performance tasks. The content of Smart Class is designed for the entire academic year, and it is available for 5 major subjects. All aligned with DepEd's K-12 curriculum and covers the most essential learning competencies prescribed by DepEd. Secure your own copy of Smart Class before classes open. Contact marketing@vibalgroup.com to know more.
Good day, Kavibal, and welcome to our Learn at Home series. For the discussion today, the topic will be on teaching comprehension across subject areas for high school learners. Before we begin, take note of the following reminders. Make sure you are registered to the webinar to have your e-certificate of participation. Visit certificate.vibalgroup.com to generate your proof of attendance. Place your questions on the comment box allotted during the session and they will be addressed by our speaker later on. Share the video using hashtag LearnAs1PH as our official hashtag to our Vibal webinars. Experience learning, ka-Vibal? And now, to proceed with our webinar this evening, it is my pleasure to introduce to you our distinguished speaker today. He is a consultant evaluator for K-12 Philippine Basic Education, curriculum and academic consultant of Sisters of Mary. Ladies and gentlemen, Brother Roderick M. Aguirre.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. So welcome again to our session on teaching comprehension. This time around, it will be teaching comprehension, reading comprehension across the subject areas. Before I proceed, I would like to give a shout out to some of the following people who are tuning in and watching right now, to Ma'am Mary Ann Ramos Boctil from San Pablo, Laguna. Thank you very much for continuously supporting my webinars with Vibal and hashtag LearnAs1. And I would like to also give a shout out to Raymond Ibasco from De La Salle University. That's a great friend of mine and a colleague, for tuning in and watching my session. And my session tonight, and he said he watched the session this morning. And I would like to thank him for my polo shirt today. Thank you very much. And at least I have a one collection polo shirt. So let's now proceed to my session this afternoon. And my topic for this afternoon is a continuation of the topic that I initially gave this morning, which is on teaching comprehension of informational text. And it is something that we need to help our students acquire. As I've said, teaching comprehension of informational text are sets of skills that help our students traverse over some information, vital information in informational texts, and it will help them survive some of the reading demands of the other subject areas. Now, those are just tuning in today and we're not able to watch my webinar this morning via FB Live. You may want to review that because my evening session today have assumed that most of you have already watched the basic of teaching comprehending basic skills of comprehending informational text. And now I will now discuss how those sets of skills can be transferred and used in the process of comprehending, reading and comprehending informational text across subject areas like mathematics and science. And for tonight, I chose science and mathematics as my example on how we can apply all of these sets of skills, critical thinking skills and reading skills, to helping our students understand informational text. Okay, so my title here is Teaching Comprehension across Subject Areas. And my goal here is to make all educators teachers of reading. If I will be asked by CHED and Department of Education how we can help our teachers out there become, good in helping students effective, I mean, not just good, effective in helping students learn the content, but at the same time, develop their literacy skills even further in the subject areas. I would want our teachers to go through intensive training on reading. And I believe that all teachers, despite the subject you're teaching, you are all reading teachers. Reason being, we all require our students to read books, to read lessons that we provided for them, and it requires them to understand those selections and those lessons. And if we do not give them explicit guidance in providing them with strategies and techniques to first understand the lesson, the content of the lesson, before they're actually able to discern how and what skills are accompanied with this type of information, and in what context and in what situation such knowledge and skills are to be applied into or applied in. So my outline for tonight's 1 hour session will be focusing more on answering the following questions. So what is reading in the subject content or subject areas? And then what model could be used to teach reading comprehension across subject areas? So I'll be introducing a model that has been out there for quite some time. And I presume and probably assume too much that a lot of you already know this model, and I'm just giving you a refresher of it. Nonetheless, this model also help us in developing our materials, be it online material or be it the modular approach. That being said, we will now, once I have given you an example how the model can be applied in terms of preparing our materials that will be conducive to reading and comprehending the material at home and via online, you will now have an open forum. So if you have questions, inquiries, and clarifications and certain cobwebs along the way as I discuss the topic, please do not hesitate to key in your questions or clarifications in the comments section below. All right, and then afterwards, we will have conclusions and implications and challenges that I will provide with you or for you. Let's begin with discussion. Let us try to understand how teaching of reading comprehension across subject area is done effectively. All right. So the question of what is reading in the content area or subject area must be elucidated tonight before we proceed to the model, because we need to come up with one understanding, one rock solid foundation of understanding of the concept of reading in the content areas and what it means to all of us as educators who are requiring our students to read a lot of reading materials in our subject area. So I would like to explain what is reading in the content areas, first and foremost by the reading developmental stages. So our students go through the following developmental stages. So from 0 to 5 years old, it's called emergent literacy. Basically, their literacy development, early literacy development comes from their exposure, their experience with the environment. Especially at home. So the more students are exposed early on to literacy activities like drawing, writing, talking, and labeling things in a fun way, like games and plays, students are developing a huge understanding of the world, hence emergent literacy. So it's more of an acquisition level, and it still is an informal way of acquiring certain information, certain concepts from the environment. And then as the child enters formal education, the child now is introduced to the skills, okay? The skills formally being taught by the teacher. So assuming that the teachers already are well-versed with the backgrounds of our students, teachers now will use the emergent literacy background or foundation of the students. I would now pose as a student schema to the beginning reading. So teachers must come up with examples, pictures, and concepts that are meaningful to the emergent literacy foundation of students or their schema. All right. And then after, like within the middle grade 3 up to grade 2 to grade 3, so there is interlacing of the stages. Our students now are developing in their language, and there is a rapid growth of development in terms of their vocabulary use. So students right here are now extending their vocabulary to different nuances of how it is used in different contexts. Thereby, our students become more increasingly aware that certain words have different meanings as they are used in different contexts. So the focus here right now is helping our students to develop more vocabulary strategies to attack articles, to attack reading selections. So this is about grade 2 to grade 3. So hopefully our teachers have taken care of that. Then by grade 4 to grade 6, our students now will be required to read a lot of readings in the materials of the content area. And this is what we call as reading to learn. This is now what we call as the start and the beginning of content area reading. That is basically from grade 4 up to grade 6, even up to higher levels. It is now what we call as reading to learn. Therefore, reading in the content area as based on the reading developmental stages is defined as reading to learn. Since our students are now prolifically good in their vocabulary, now the teachers can use the skills on word attack and word knowledge to how they are used in the subject areas and how these words provide information based on how they are organized in a certain way of a certain subject. So we need to teach our students that certain subject area require our students to think in a certain cognitive landscape. A good example would be science is a highly procedural kind of subject area, and therefore procedural and problem solution based, cause effect. We need to help our students think in that kind of cognitive landscape. Otherwise, if their cognitive landscape in attacking reading to learn in science is on the narrative perspective, then they will not understand, they will not understand or they will miscomprehend the selection or the informational text in science, all right? I have observed that it is not just the problem of the students though. Some of our teachers, I just observed, when I was asked to observe some of the intermediate teachers, some of the teachers in science would ask who, what, when questions like the characters, what was the problem. I think the questions for that are that questions who, what, when, where in terms of the story grammar is more of a narrative text, comprehending narrative text, than of helping students comprehend information text. So the way we ask questions also prepare our students to think in that kind of cognitive landscape. And finally, once we have taught our students to read in the content areas by teaching them to read to learn, our students now are ready for abstract reading, or basically that would be for high school right now. So to summarize what I've discussed, it's basically like this. So our students are exposed to the world first, and by knowing and by this world, students come to the class with various concepts about things around them, about experiences around them, and we must maximize this in the teaching of the beginning reading. So, but remember, it must be explicitly taught. Teaching students about phonemic awareness, about alphabetic knowledge, and all other beginning reading skills must be explicitly taught to the students, because these are skills, and skills are to be taught in procedural knowledge format, and in a way that students can exactly see from a model how it is done. And of course, when teaching beginning reading, we need to explicitly integrate connection of the things they are bringing into the class or to the formal situation. Otherwise, our students, look at the baby there, will not see the connection of what they are learning right now, because it's totally a dissonance experience of what the teacher is teaching us and what I have experienced in real life. All right. Then the teacher now, as he moves to other grade levels like grade two and grade three, our teachers now are teaching words or word knowledge for our students to actually understand certain sentences, and the sentences based on the common words would carry with them certain meanings, and that we are helping our students to increase their vocabulary, thereby facilitating comprehension. And most of the selections here are still in narrative, although there are already informational texts being introduced here, but they are more passages, more of a minor text than a major text. And then, of course, we need to incorporate also the things that they have learned from the skills at the beginning reading. Then once done, again, look at that, still explicit teaching of the skills. Our students now are ready to do learning, meaning how are we able to transfer the skills of comprehending narrative text, of their vocabulary, skills on attacking vocabulary, their knowledge on sounds, on pronunciation, and all of this oracy skills are used to understand informational text across subject areas. All right. And of course, that's why the arrows go down too. That means we need to explicitly integrate a continuous process of integrating all of this progressively, all of these skills. And then finally, we teach our students abstract reading for them to become independent readers. So we're hoping that by high school, students, when they enter high school, they are now independent readers. They are now reading independently for research to augment their knowledge, all right? Because they are now equipped with the necessary basic, critical, and evaluative reading skills to help them survive their academic subjects. So to summarize it, content area reading is most simply reading to learn. It encompasses all the skills and abilities required for a student to read complex informational text found typically in social studies, science, and math. Therefore, all those teachers teaching content area subjects like social studies, science, mathematics, TVED, and EPP, ESP are all reading and language teachers, because we use language to help our students understand the content of the subject we're teaching. And at the same time, since we are requiring our students to read a lot of reading materials in our content to acquire more knowledge and learn a lot of skills, then we have to facilitate the development of materials and our delivery in such a way that our students are able to comprehend the content of our subject. Right? So that being answered, the first question being answered, let's now proceed to next question. Sir, do you have a model that you can suggest to us that could help my students comprehend selections across subject areas? Yes, and that's what we call, and I call it as Erica. All right. ERICA is not a name of a person, but it stands for effective reading in the content area. Okay, effective reading in the content area. ERICA is a model which is a combination of different sets of skills. Okay, which I already explained some of it early this morning on comprehending information text. That once learned means that students are able to think more clearly about the content of the course they are studying, extract and organize information from their text for particular purposes, write more effectively, speak more clearly about the discipline content, and study and function more successfully as independent learners. So by equipping our students with these sets of skills, our students now are able to learn the content via the reading skills, of course, and then be able to go forward with further critical evaluative learning of the content area. Remember, we cannot ask our students to do something in our subject area without them understanding some of the information that they need to learn. Okay, so let's find out the components of the ERICA. There are 4 components of the ERICA model. It starts with preparing for reading. Meaning these are sets of activities, sets of techniques that we can help our students prepare in the reading and the understanding of certain selection we would like our students to read, especially in social sciences na saraling palipunan sa especially yung kasaysayan, ang daming babasahin ng bata. So how do we help them actually prepare for those kind of bulk of reading materials? So we need to prepare them for that. And I'll give you an example later on that. Next is that by helping students to think through. So the job of the teacher here is to provide certain scaffold, but this is not more of a hard scaffold, but it's more of a soft scaffold where the teacher provides guide questions that start from a generic perspective going to a more specific perspective and then going outside the lesson. That's why we called it as a 3-level guide questions or the art of questioning. So thinking through, and we've already discussed that via questions we help our students develop critical thinking skills, and then we also prepare our students with certain strategies like providing graphic organizers, outlines, and cue cards to help our students extract and organize information from the selection they're reading. Also, that the questions that we provide during the thinking through part also help our students mitigate on how they're going to extract the top three levels of information in an informational text. Again, the top 3 levels of information would be the topic, main idea, and supporting details. Also, that our students are now being prepared to translate information. So translating information will now be helping our students go beyond what the content is all about. But again, the ERICA model is not a model that stands on its own. It still is subjected to the lesson objectives of a particular subject area of a particular lesson. So it does not stand that you use the model without considering the learning competencies or the sets of learning objectives that have to be realized. So I will show to you how it's done. All right. So let's focus on the first component, which is preparing for reading. So we prepare our students' brain, their mental processing, and their emotions to, 1, by providing with structured overview for them to understand the holistic nature of the lesson. Next, how do we do that? It could be, we have to start with teacher developed activities, moving to teacher and student developed activities, and then once students already know that before they read something or they study something, they prepare their minds first, right? So we need the way we develop our materials. It should be structured in such a way that it starts from teacher-made activity, teacher and student activity, and student prepared activity. For my example tonight, I'll be using teacher developed, okay? Since of course, we cannot do teacher and viewer development at the same time because you guys are not present and this is basically online and I do not see you, all right? Next would be graphic outlines. if you want to know more about this, you may want to review my webinar on developing memory skills through graphic presentations. So I already discussed a lot of graphic presentations, but here in preparing for reading, it's basically helping our students prepare their memory systems to organize the information. So again, the rhetorical pattern, how the information are organized in the selection or the reading material, say the book, would help our students prepare their minds to think in that way. All right, and then they will be able to somehow, one way or the other, predict what they're actually be reading. Okay, I liken preparing for reading as planning. It's like planning for a vacation, and when you plan for vacation, you mentally and emotionally prepare yourselves for that. And once you mentally prepare, you're mentally and emotionally prepared for that, you now know exactly what to do step by step. So that's how I liken preparing for reading. Okay. Also, the third things that you can do to prepare your students for reading in a subject area is to also look at certain vocabulary that your students will probably most likely stumble over. So there are three types of vocabulary. We have the common vocabulary, we have the common or general vocabulary, we have the special vocabulary, and we have the technical vocabulary. For looking at new vocabulary strategies, you need to focus on certain special vocabulary and technical vocabulary, because these are the vocabulary that students may possibly have not encountered in their previous grade levels, or special vocabulary that they have encountered before, but it has a different treatment or meaning in the subject area. Like a good example that I've said, like heart was used in science, and then all of a sudden when it's used in English or in literature, it's heart of the ocean, becomes now used differently. All right, so associations will be taught. If you want to know more about teaching vocabulary, I will have a different session on teaching vocabulary by next week. Hopefully that will be approved. Cross your fingers. And then we have identify content vocabulary, and we have teaching necessary jargon. Okay, so let's have an example. Let's apply immediately. Let's not wait. I will not discuss everything. Let's just, one step at a time and then see how it's applied. So I use the Learn at Home for. I requested Ibal to provide me the modules that they are using for Learn at Home, and I chose the subject mathematics. And in page 292, it's all about identifying place value and value up to 100,000. Now I will have to design the material. Okay, I will design the material with the help of the module in such a way that it fits the model of helping our students, my students, to learn identifying place value and value up to 100,000 through reading in the content areas, or ERICA, effective reading in the content areas. Okay, so the lesson objectives of Mathematics 4 quarter 1 is to identify place value and value up to 100,000 using the place value chart. Number 2, write each number in expanded form and word form. And then finally, third lesson objective, apply knowledge on place value and value up to 100,000 in reading distances. All right. Well, at least there's an application of how place value has relevance to reading distances, probably locations too, in terms of numeric format. So in terms of preparing my students for reading using the ERICA models component 1, I will prepare a material on structured overview. So I will introduce them the place value chart with 100,000 already. So if my students already went through place value up to 10,000, they will now see that I have added another column on 100,000. So I am now helping them connect what they have learned before the previous lesson. Since this is the first quarter grade 4, I'm somehow helping them recall what they have learned on place value in third grade. All right. So by helping them recall the information that they previously acquired in the previous grade level, by showing this chart, the structure overview to them, it somehow gives them a trigger to retrieve the information that they stored in their long-term memory. Again, remember, once the kids have already been exposed to iconic, again, review my session on memory skills development through graphic presentations. Research shows a lot of research shows can generalize that once students have been exposed to icon memory inputs and to echoic memory inputs, well, nakikita nila at naririnig nila, ma-explain siya si teacher, at mga bata, mas madali nilang maalala at ma-store yan sa kanilang memory. So when we do the lesson on hundreds, since it's a new lesson, we need to come up with a chart or a picture that would help them trigger connection of what they previously learned and what they're supposed to learn today. All right? So that will be one, structured overview. Another one, I will present to the students graphic outlines, I'll focus on recognizing the organization of the text, meaning how the lesson or the information in the book or the module that they will be reading at home. Remember, they are at home. Okay, the teacher is not present. Therefore, the teacher must organize the module or the online material in such a way that it facilitates gradual understanding of the material. It is not like we are inside the real classroom where all our students are there. And if we somehow ask certain students about if they understood what we said and they would, say no, at least we can do something about making some adjustments and re-explanation of the concept so that they will understand. But we are not present at home. Therefore, we have to meticulously structure our materials in such a way that it is conducive to the development of reading and for them to understand concepts step by step. So this is pre-reading, so preparing for our students. So here are the steps. So in the book, in the book that they're supposed to read, my students need to understand that the information in the book and the module or module 1 in mathematics is organized into steps in running numbers in expanded format and step by step. So by allowing my students to look at this graphic organizer, their minds are being prepared. Oh, so I will be reading a list. Okay, I will be reading a list of steps on how to do expanded form. So their brains are now being prepared. Now I have to think in the listing perspective. Okay. There's another one in the book. It says steps in writing numbers in word form. All right, and similar. All right, similar though. And then I have vocabulary. And then, of course, part of my responsibility as a teacher of the content area, I need to read the whole lesson and then need to identify certain words that students will probably stumble over. And then to remedy that before the problem occurs or the problem happens, I will have identifying vocabulary. I would have the following words have been used recurringly in the lesson. So multi-digit number, place value, standard form, expanded form, and word forms. I will ask my students to, if it's an online material, I will ask my students to Google the Merriam-Webster online dictionary and look for the definition of these words. And then there's also an example of those words in the subject area, how it's used in mathematics, and key in the example there. So I'm now asking my students to research, and then by doing the research, basically my students are being prepared as to the language of the reading material. So that being said, our students are now ready to read. We have aptly prepared them to attack the reading material in mathematics. So the second sets of activities would be a great help for our students. It's called now thinking through. So thinking through is basically providing our students with using 3-level guides or questions that will help our students to think in a gradual way from extracting literal information from the selection, moving to interpreting information from the selection, and then applying the information from the selection to certain skills and certain situations that we want our students to be able to do based on the learning competency as stated in the lesson itself. So the 3-level guides are level 1, literal comprehension. So these are math and factual information which needs to be used selectively. It's called selectively because we need to highlight only the information. So when we prepare the materials, we need to highlight only the information that is needed for our students to actually understand the lesson. If our focus is on the steps, then we need to highlight step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. Okay, so we need to bold it. Probably we put capital letters on step 1, step 2. So our students' mind will automatically focus on that. Remember my discussion on scheming and scanning. We need to design our reading material or modular material or online material in such a way that will help our students to scheme and scan. And that's what it means by saying literal comprehension, mass and factual information which needs to be used selectively. Now, level 2 means interpretive comprehension. All right, interpretive comprehension is more on interpretations to be made and inferences drawn, meaning these are some of how these concepts are actualized and practiced. So this is where we help our students make a connection of what they already know, and the information being provided for in the reading material, and come up with an activity that will synergize what they have in their head as schema or their background knowledge to what they are reading right now, okay? Especially on this lesson, all right? And then we proceed to level 3, applied comprehension. We are now going back to what is the final intention of the lesson. So the applied comprehension here is going back to the content objectives. Observe, the level 3 applied comprehension, the ERIC model, is content objectives to which the information is directed, meaning all of what we're doing here is still lesson objective based. Okay, it's the model that does not stand alone. It conforms to the lesson objectives of the subject area. All right, let me give you an example. Therefore, when we structure the questions and guide questions to our students, it must be from literal, going to interpretive, going to applied. Hence, there must be an art of formulating the questions and sequencing the questions to the students in such a way that they think from literal going to applied. Because it's difficult for our students to think from applied, going to interpretive and going to literal. I know that some of students are moving quite fast, but for materials preparation and for the delivery in the pandemic where students are at home, we need to structure our learners in a more normative way, that is from literal, going to interpretive, and going to applied. All those who are fast learners can follow the guide. But our students, if we do not follow this kind of guide, our students who are struggling with the subject area, if we start immediately with interpretive, like we ask them immediately to do exercises, board work without literal comprehension, what are the steps? They will be lost in the process. Okay? Yun po ang problema natin kasi kung hindi natin ginamit ang ERICA model in developing the materials, we have a lot of assumptions and we assume na baka natutunan ng mga bata. No, with the ERICA model, we assume the students have not mastered certain backgrounds. Okay, so let me give you an example using again still the mathematics 4 lesson, identifying place value and value to 100,000. Let me check my time. Okay, I will highlight lesson objective 1 and 2. Okay, so these are some of the guide questions that I formulated. So during how I will structure the information, in the module or in the online material will based on the following questions. I will start first with what is the place value, and then I will have input, and then what is a place value chart, and I will have input. And then I will now have level 2 interpretive comprehension. I will now have how does the place value chart help in writing multi-digit numbers in expanded and word form. So I will now have that. That will be my third question. And then I will now have input. And then finally, I will have the third question. How do you properly read and write distances? And that will be my third part of my module development. My point here is that in the regular way of writing textbook is the textbooks previously before the pandemic were designed in such a way that there is a hard presence of the teacher while using the material. Even if they're reading advanced at home, there's still a situation, 100% situation where it will still be used in school, and the teacher will still be there as will pose as a scaffold or support to the understanding of the reading material. But remember, students will be left alone at home. Therefore, how we structure the input, okay, ito na nga po to input ng impormasyon ng lesson na yan must be using the 3-level guide. Okay, I think some of our teachers in the Sisters of Mary, if not all teachers of the Sisters of Mary, have been trained. The way we develop the materials are in question answer format, in using thinking through format. So all our materials in the Sisters of Mary, and of course the Vibal materials, have all been redesigned in such a way that it facilitates thinking through using a structured way of of presenting the information to the students or the input to the students. Kasi mahirap nga naman po na unahin mo ang impormasyon na mahirap tapos padali ng padali. Aba, unahin mo muna yung madali papunta sa pinakamahirap na impormasyon. And that's what thinking through is all about. Okay, create guide questions, the 3-level guide questions from literal going up to applied, and then structure your input in that way. Okay. Once we have that material, our students, if our material for the input has been structured using the 3-level guides, our students will be easily facilitated to extract and organize information. So these are the things that we can help our students to facilitate extraction and organization of the top 3 levels of information. So we have the overall plan again. So we use graphic organizers or just questions again, right? So it could be teacher developed. Not good. It should start from teacher developed, teacher and student developed, and then student prepared. We can have activities here like just questions that students can can think about before they embark on another activity, which is what we call as extracting many ideas and supporting details via guide questions, cueing guides, and summarizing tablets. And then another one is using graphic organizers or graphic presentations to aid understanding. These are graphic organizers, we have outlines, and so on and so forth. So how is extracting organizing after thinking through is done? All right. So we have still focusing on lesson objectives 1 and 2. So I will now ask my students to use the place value chart. Remember that I initially showed this before asking my students to read the input in the thinking through. So now my students now are familiar with the input. So I will now ask my students to place this example, this digits, this multi-digit numbers in its appropriate place value. I actually got it from the book, but I had to encode it because I didn't have enough time to take pictures of it. So, and it didn't look good in my slide. So it's actually in the book, but I encoded this, right? So an exercise, meaning extraction now here for the mathematics is helping my students to apply the structures that I have exposed them with, and then actually do practice, okay? Steps in writing. So I will now be asking my students to use the graphic organizer that I presented in the preparation or preparing for reading. But I have an added element. I will ask them to come up with their own examples. For step 1, what is their personal example? So this is now interpreted, remember? It's now moving to interpretive, that's extracting and organizing. So I'm now asking my students to get the information from the input, from the book, the reading selection there, or whatever input there is in the book. And then I'm asking them to translate that into their own words. And by asking them to come up with their own examples is helping them store the information in their long-term memory. Okay, again, I already had a discussion on that, on developing and enhancing memory skills through graphic presentations. So that's for expanded. Similar activity will be done for steps in writing numbers in word form. All right. So examples again. Okay, and now I am now on the last component of the ERICA model, which is now called translating information. All right, so translating information would be 1, helping our students elaborate and generate ideas. So through collaboration and conversations and composing oral and written text. Now elaborating means by the graphic organizer that they came up with, the one that I presented just a while ago with examples, they will now have to discuss that. So since they're at home, you can ask your students to have a group chat or a Zoom session for collaboration, and they discuss among themselves how the explain how the steps are done in making expanded form of multi-digit numbers, and how to convert multi-digit numbers into word form. Point here is that by asking students to elaborate or just talking about it with other people, it could be the parents, it could be the primary caregivers at home, it would facilitate more comprehension, more understanding of the lesson instead of just, the student and the book. Ang bata lang at saka ang libro, tas wala kang guide na mga ganito, nakatunganga ang bata. Kung ang gagawin lang nila ay puro basa lang tapos exercises sa mathematics, I tell you at home, they will hate the subject even more. Wala nang support kasi si teacher eh. Di nga niya maintindihan. Tapos ang materials, hindi pa nakastructure in such a way that helps them comprehend the information or comprehend the material. And then finally, the translating information is we have the representing and creating ideas. We can ask our students to come up with their own ways how the use of place value up to the 100 place value to the 100,000 used in reading and writing distances. Okay, a multi-digit number. So extended learning to the outside world, translating ideas in creative presentation. So my example here, which I did not think of examples anymore because I'm now taking care of the third competency lesson objective of the mathematics 4 part 1. So I just extracted some of the lessons in the book. Napagod na po ako mag-encode. So ginawa ko na lang, kinuna ko ng picture. Medyo pangit po ako ng picture. So I would ask my students, I would put there in my slide or in my module saying, answer activities in your Learn at Home for academic book for quarter 1. That will be pages 300 to 302, and I have an example. And then another one, small group activity. So in the small group activity, I'll be asking my students to take turns in sharing each member's answer in each of the activities in the module, provide each feedback whether the process and answer is correct or not. So ibig sabihin, yung kanilang ginawa dito, sila muna mag-uusap kung tama ba ang kanilang ginawa. They already have their guide in checking it because they already had the steps on how to convert a multi-digit number into expanded form and into word form. So I'm now asking my students to be independent. Why am I doing that? Because I am not present during their collaborative time. I'm not present during their individual understanding of the modules. So I have to facilitate certain activities, put in my material certain activities that would guide them to help my students traverse the reading material from literal going to apply. All right. So if that makes sense to you now, let's now have a mini workshop. I prepared an example for how it's applied, say, in math and in science. So let's now use science. I use science 7 in Vibal's Learn at Home series quarter 1, and the learning objectives are identifying components of the scientific method. The lesson is scientific method. The lesson objective is on identifying components of the scientific investigation, explain the importance of scientific method in conducting science research, and use a scientific method in scientifically investigating a chosen phenomenon observed at home. Wow. All right. So my preparing for reading, so my material, how I will organize the delivery, be it online or in module format, how I will deliver it to my students at home will be one. I will create a concept overview, teacher prepared, by showing to them certain pictures. All right. So these are certain phenomena happening. So I'm now, one way or the other, my students are now asking their mind, why is that plant starting as a seed and growing? What makes it grow? All right. So I'll be asking my students, look at the pictures, look at the first picture. What questions can you formulate out of these questions based on what you observe? So I'm actually preparing their brains that scientific method is basically formulating problems or questions based on what they observe. All right. And then I would probably give them another example. Say, what questions can you given this kind of picture. So similar thing. So I'm now preparing my students on conceptually to the lesson they're supposed to read given their module on scientific method. And then I'll provide them with a graphic organizer like this. So if it's in the module that will not be animated, but if it's of course in online, it will be animated. Okay. If not in the module or the activity sheet, then it would look like this. So highly colored, I have different colors so that it will show that there's a transition from a step to another step and so on and so forth. All right. So I'm now asking my students to look at, oh, so this is a sequence of steps. All right. So the students are now thinking that, oh, so I am now being prepared to think that I will be reading about the sequence of steps of how to do something. All right. And then I will have vocabulary again because as I've investigated and I have read the whole lesson, these are the words that I think students will stumble over on their own at home reading the modules. The words are investigation. I know that my students know investigation per se, but I would like it to be there during their activity of looking for the definition because I would like them to see that there's a huge difference in nuance of investigation to science investigation. All right. Then scientific method, hypothesis, experimentation, verification, theory, and natural law. My point here, ladies and gentlemen, is that by doing this, I know that there's a lot of teacher preparation on making modules using the ERICA model, but with this model, it will definitely help our students facilitate understanding of the content, thereby facilitating learning at home because we are not present. And of course, even if parents are there, we cannot say altogether that parents are, good scaffold or facilitators of what the students are learning that day. All right. So this will be an activity that my students will. So I'll ask them to do this actually teacher and student prepared. So I've prepared the slide and dictionary and example will be given by my students. So this is a teacher student prepared activity. And then I'll proceed to thinking through, taking care of lesson objective 1 and 2. So these are my questions. Okay, literal question will be what is science investigation? So I will reorganize my material into questions coming from literal, help facilitating literal comprehension to applied questions. So what is science investigation? Then I will now in my material answers to it. And then next would be what are the different components of the scientific method? And then answer to it. And then moving towards another set of information, moving to interpretive comprehension of the input. How does the scientific method how does the scientific method help in making science investigations? So that will be my next input. Then finally, I will have the applied comprehension. The last input in my module would be how is the scientific method applied in real life phenomenon, right? So you would see that the information that students will be reading is organized in such a way that it's using the 3-level guides. So, sorry to shift Filipino. So, sir, ganun pala mangyayari. Kahit nakapag-research na kayo ng informasyon, kailangan ko pa rin siyang structure using that 3-level guide. Using those questions, formulating questions, yes. Again, I will say it once more, over and over again. Wala po kayo doon sa bahay ng mga bata na magpa-facilitate just in case students' comprehension breaks down. Kung ganito ang pagkakadevelop natin, alam natin na ma-discuss, ito ang tanong, tapos may sagot. So wala nang lusot ang bata ng ibang stumbling blocks. Klarong-klaro lang kung anong impormasyon ang dapat niyang intindihin using the 3-level guides. All other information are not relevant. Nakalagay po dating kan explanation sa Erica, selectively used. Okay? Dahil yun ang nakalagay sa learning competencies. Right? That's thinking through. So we have to organize the materials on the input in our module or online material using the 3-level guides. All right? So let's proceed now to extracting and organizing, still taking care of realizing lesson objective 1 and objectives 1 and 2. So I will ask my students now to, I have an activity sheet, okay? So the activity sheet na po ito. So ang gagawin ng bata, After or while reading, they're now going to extract explanations each of the scientific method. They're going to identify what is the first step, anong description nun, ano yung first, second step, anong description na yun, and so on and so forth. So I'm now asking them to make a graphic organizer, extracting using a graphic organizer that facilitate enumeration description. All right. All right. And then we now move on to translating, going to apply. So individual activity, nandito po sa libro, ilalagay ko lang po na answer. Yes, in the book it says answer the sci exercise and learn at home, 7 academic book, quarter 1, page 474. Ang ganda ng activity. So it really translates, help students translate. So they can do that. And there's a little bit of experimentation that they can conduct, really simple experiment at home, but it's individual. And then for small group activity, remember, it's very important that we have individual and small group activity in collaboration. I don't know how you're gonna facilitate collaborative learning where there is no internet connection. So probably you may want to enlist the help of the parents. Ang kailangan lang naman po dito ay ma-develop yung elaboration at generation skills ng bata. Ibig sabihin, yung natutunan nila, nakikwento at nasasabi sa mga bata. But this is the activity in the book. As a group, choose and investigate one phenomenon observed at home and use the scientific method in scientifically explaining it. Prepare a 5 to 10 minute group conference presentation to be presented, that should not be placed, to be presented next meeting. And voila, na-organize mo na ang iyong lesson using the ERICA model that facilitates independent learning. But again, remember, at the end, kailangan mo siyang small group. Kasi si teacher din naman po ang patay kung individual presentation po kung 25, 40, kung sa public school, 60 students or more than 60 students, tas individual presentation, ubos ang buong quarter sa isang lesson presentation lamang. Alright? So I would suggest a small group activity. If it cannot be facilitated, perhaps you can just identify certain students who will do the activity, and then the next lesson, another chosen different group of students will be chosen to do the small group activity. With that being said, I know I have a lot time. So at this point, after my mini workshop, I am now ready to entertain questions. Yes, my moderator is Jillian and Inano, right?
Thank you very much, Brother Roderick. Now we will proceed to the question and answer portion. Our first question is from Darwin Magallanes. Which is more effective? Reading silently or just reading using eyes only?
Reading silently or reading with eyes only? That's kind of the same, I suppose. I think you're asking me is which one is more effective, reading silently using the eyes or reading aloud, okay, voicing out, okay? It depends on the grade level and it depends on where the students are in terms of their reading ability or fluency. Research shows that students, there are a lot of students, even adult learners who, like myself, there are instances that I orally read some selections because the more I listen to it, the more I understand it. Now, there are some reading materials that require me to do silent reading. So it depends on the material that I'm reading. So, but if our students are very young and they are, their lips are moving, research show that if our students are, lip reading, are moving with their eyes too much and their lips are reading stuff, the lips are moving so much, it somehow impedes in the proficiency of the understanding of the reading material. So I suggest that we start from reading aloud. I have a session on reading aloud first. Reading aloud, moving to silent reading, okay? Moving to silent reading. But then again, reading aloud is also a strategy to facilitate comprehension. So it does not necessarily mean that our students are struggling when they're reading aloud, unless of course the reading aloud has many pauses which could be identified as errors. I would love to talk about that. On that, ang tawag kasi po dyan ay assessment of reading through miscue analysis. Okay, I'll write that down. For that, may binigay ka sa akin idea. That's called as reading assessment through Miss Q analysis. Thank you. That's my answer. Thank you.
Thank you for that, brother. Next question po. I have a student with poor comprehension. How can their parents help them during their learning at home using the BALS Learn at Home kits? That's from Joseph Hermoso.
Oh, wow. Yan nga po ang sinasabi ko. With the general announcement of our secretary that she's endorsing and requiring a modular mode of delivery of learning to the public school system, and somehow encouraging all the private schools to do the same. We are assuming that our students are all proficient readers. Our students are still, especially in the early grades, they are still being taught to read. And if it's modular, and we have assumed, so the development of the material for teaching students are still being taught to read, would they be very, very challenging. I'd love to talk about that, but that's something else. I could only say that the material for those students are still learning to read in the early grades be with lots of pictures. The ratio of the development of material should be 70% pictures, 30% words. Then for students who are still struggling, they are already been taught how to read, and they are now saying grade 4, grade 5, grade 6, and they are struggling readers. Please do not call them non-readers. We just call them as struggling readers because we need to identify which of those skills they have not mastered yet, or probably they have not been taught how to actually read because we did not explicitly taught them those skills. So we just assumed. So therefore, they're not non-readers. They are just struggling readers, or better yet, they're still beginning readers because they were not taught to begin with. All right. So say our students are struggling readers. I think the materials must be developed very, very structured, very simple. Kagaya ng Eric na model, pero mas simple pa po na mas konti lang impormasyon para diretso po agad sa ano lang dapat ko matutunan at ang dapat ko magawa. Wala nang mga example, wala nang pa-joke, kung ano mga pictures, diretsahan na agad. I think for struggling readers, direct to the point, using lots of pictures, especially for struggling readers, comprehension is facilitated by pictures. So I would say now for struggling readers would have 50% pictures, and then 50% words. Now for proficient readers, we can now have, especially for the high school, we can now go on for 60 to 70% words, and then we have 30 to 40% word. No, pictures. Baliktad na. Mas marami na ang words kaysa sa pictures. So that's how we can facilitate. Yun nga po ang sinasabi ko. Matagal ko na pong malaking struggle and problem how we can help our teachers out there create materials that does not assume that our students are proficient readers, especially in math, science, naraling panlipon na maraming babasahin. At nasa bahay pa sila. So ang sinasabi ko po is structure it using the ratio that I provided you with, and then use Erica model so that your material are developed highly structured so that students can gradually traverse over the material with guidance without the teacher being present there. Thank you very much, Jillian, for that question. That's from Maureen.
From Joseph Hermoso, sir.
That's from Joseph
Yes,
Hermoso. Thank you very much.
For our last question po, it's from Marjorie Ordonez. Any suggestions po on how we can build reading comprehension of our online learners through questions, especially those who struggle in reading?
Oh, well, yun nga po. Especially for the use of questions for struggling readers, yun nga po, kailangan yung ma-structure ang tanong ninyo. Your questions must start from the most basic question, like, simple lang na tanong. Kung ito po, what is the title of the selection? What is it all about? What is the lesson title? What is the unit title? Ganun ka, ano muna, para kung sa atin, unahin nyo muna ang tanong na sa tingin nyo, sobrang bobo. Pero hindi yun bobo. Those are common questions that should be asked first. easy questions first to facilitate extraction of easy information. All right? But then again, kahit anong gawa natin ng tanong na maganda, na structure na po from easy to difficult, using literal questions to facilitate extraction of literal information, interpretive questions to extract interpretive information, applied questions to extract applied questions in that structure. Kahit ganun pa ganun ang structure, kung ang ating materialis ay hindi po naka-structure in that way, mahirapan pa rin po ang mga bata. Kahit pa yan kahit hindi pa yan struggling students. Yung mga galing na mga estudyante because wala nga masyadong support sa teacher, mag-struggle yan din, mag-isa sa bahay nila because they are on their own. Hindi ang ating materials po ay hindi dapat ma-develop kagaya ng regular development of materials nung walang pandemic dahil it was designed na nandyan si teacher. Ang materials ngayon should be designed na parang si teacher nagtuturo kung paano si teacher magturo, anong pagkakasunod-sunod, dapat ganon. And the model on Erica model is a good model of highly structuring the materials to facilitate a modular delivery or online delivery that facilitate the comprehension of the reading materials or the input in the subject area. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Brother Roderick. That's all the questions we have for now. Any last reminders to our viewers for today?
Thank you. Of course, I always have last reminders and challenges for our teachers, but these are my conclusions, implications for our viewers out there. So some of the takeaways. Okay, the proponent of more of Erica model, effective reading in the content area are Morris and Stuart Dorr. So if you want to read more on Erica model has lots of researches, effective. A lot of testimonies how effective it is in the subject areas. There are a lot of samples and lessons and how materials are developed online, so you can Google it. Just put their Erica model by Morris and Stuart Dorr. Just look at it. It has been there since 1984. Okay? Parang kami lang yata mga reading specialist ang nakakaalam ng Erica model na yung sinasabi ko dapat lahat ng mga teachers kumukuha ng specializations reading. Anyway, comprehending needs to be taught and not assumed. Meaning, it has to be explicitly taught to the students, hence materials structured to facilitate explicit understanding and actual use of the sets of skills to comprehend the material in the content area. Because if we do not facilitate understanding of the content area or reading comprehension of the content area, then our students will not learn the content. Ganun lang naman yun. If there's no comprehension, there is no learning. Kung walang pag-intindi, walang pagkatuto. Ganun lang naman po kadali talaga. So talagang dapat may reading pa rin. So, our proponent on Erica further said, students need to become actively involved in the process of making sense of subject content through talking and solving problems in small groups and by experimenting with language structures and styles in their own writing. So there you go. Mas madali maintindihan ng bata pag they're able to talk about it, not just to themselves, but also to other people, since classmates will not be there too. So allow po, paki-orient din po sa mga magulang na, Nay, meron po kasi mga session, may session po kasi ang mga anak ninyo na they are supposed to talk about their lessons. So pwede po bang during your dinner time or kumakain kayo, you're asking them to talk about what they learned from science, what they learned from mathematics, and ask them some certain questions about it. So that would facilitate thinking, translating knowledge to certain applications and beyond the lesson itself. All right. So, with that being said, yung pala aking slide implications. I would like to say thank you very much for watching and viewing my session right now on teaching comprehension across subject areas. Now, to understand this even more, I would like you to review my webinar, my session on teaching comprehension of narrative texts, which was delivered last week. And just this morning, I talked about teaching comprehension of informational text. Those two webinars would help you understand even more what I've been talking about in using the Erica model. Some of the strategies that I assume that you already know have been discussed in those two webinars. With that being said, I hope to see you next week when I talk about teaching vocabulary and assessment of reading and literacy across grade levels and across skills. Thank you very much and have a good night, everyone.
There we have it. On behalf of Vibal Group Incorporated, I would like to thank our speaker for today for this very insightful learning session. It is an honor to have you with us today, brother. And to our Kavibal viewers, all thanks to you for your continuous patronage to our daily learning session. Muli, maraming salamat at magandang araw sa ating lahat.